Well, good morning. Thank you again for attending our very special series of live stream casts that we've got here. We have a very special session here with Terrell Thompson from the University of Washington and Jared Smith from WebAIM, Utah State University as well. They're going to speak to us on a very important paper and subject, the Predictors of Post-Secondary Web Accessibility 2012 and 2022. And I just want to make a note, this paper that they're presenting, the results of it, were the winners of our CSUN Strachey Award. So that's a very, very special note on the amount of research and how important it is to all of us. Let's give our attention to Terrell and Jared Smith.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everybody. So this is, as Mike said, Predictors of Post-Secondary Web Accessibility 2012 to 2022. So we did the original study in 2012, and yesterday I gave, during the keynote presentation, I gave acknowledgement to the many co-authors who were part of this effort. It very much was a team effort. And I want to just name them once again. There were several of us from the University of Washington, Dan Comden, Scott Ferguson, Dustin Bowker, and Cheryl Bergstaller. Jared from WebAIM contributed significantly to the web accessibility portion. He'll talk more about that in a moment. And Elizabeth Moore, who used to be at the UW but is now at Applied Inference, was our statistician, and she did an amazing job doing statistical analysis. And so we have essentially two studies, 10 years apart. We published one in the Information Technology and Disabilities e-journal. That was the 2012 study. And then over the years since, we've been asking ourselves, how are things changing? And thinking about how we might do things differently if we were to do the study again. And so that's what ultimately led to, on the 10-year anniversary of our original study, we decided to go back and revisit the study that we had done before. So our idea in the original study was to measure the accessibility of the top 10 web pages at all higher education institutions in the United States, collect a bunch of additional data, independent variables about all institutions, and then do an analysis to see which independent variables are the best predictors of web accessibility. So in 2012, we had some very basic measures. So web accessibility in particular, it was only 5 variables, and they were very basic. These were things that we developed ourselves, a very basic accessibility checker that could check for alt attributes, count the images on a page, how many of those had alt text, the percentage of image elements with alt attributes, the percentage of input elements with labels, the percentage of pages at an institution that had HTML headings, the percent of pages that had a lang attribute on the HTML or the body element, and the percent of pages with ARIA landmark regions. ARIA was new then, and the HTML5 semantic elements that correspond with landmark regions was not a thing yet. And so this was very early in the days of that being a thing. We also collected a bunch of demographic data from the Carnegie Foundation, and we collected the top 10 HTML pages at each institution using the Google Search API. And we did an automated check of institution homepages for an accessibility link. So we looked through all the links and we looked for the word accessibility. We generated a list of URLs, again using the Google Search API, that had the phrase web technology, or we searched for the phrase web technology accessibility policy, and then we sifted through all of those results manually to verify whether there were actually policies at each institution. And then we did a policy analysis of each of those policies. In 2012, it was a pretty simple policy analysis. We just categorized policies into 4 categories. They were either formal standalone, which is a formal web accessibility policy. They were formal incorporated, which is a policy about something else. Often it was website policy general with some accessibility component integrated into that. Or just kind of loose standards and guidelines without really being a formal policy, or just a general statement, an aspirational statement about how much we care about accessibility. And so we had some specific definitions that we were looking for in order to categorize these, and we had 3 people going through and doing the categorization. And if there was ever any question, we would get together and make a decision that was unanimous. So fast forward 10 years, we wanted to do this again. And one of the things that we had discovered, our original query using Google was for site : and the domain of the institution. And that yielded 10 web pages, but they weren't necessarily 10 core sort of central web pages. They were the 10 top web pages according to Google's algorithm. So sometimes it was departmental pages that were very popular, but they weren't managed by the central web group. And so we got a lot of outlier pages doing it that way. So we wondered, over the 10 years that followed, what if we were a little bit more specific and we included the name of the institution in addition to our original query? And that resulted in a set of 10 pages that were more core, you know, the home page, the library page, the admission page, things that you sort of think of as representative of an institution. We also wanted to do better web accessibility checking. So rather than those 5 very simple variables that we had originally, we wanted to use the Wave API. So we reached out to Jared and got Jared involved in that. And he'll talk more about the Wave API in a moment. But we also used the original 5 very basic measures too, so that we could compare over time, you know, how that had changed. We collected more independent variables in 2022, more demographics. We had over 100 variables from the Carnegie classification data set. We had more policy variables. Rather than just categorizing policies into 4 categories, we looked at each policy for the presence of specific characteristics. And on the next slide, I'll show you what those are. There were 8 characteristics we were looking for, and then ultimately a policy score that was the total of those 8. So if yes for all 8, then that would be a higher score on the policy measure than if they had none of those characteristics. We also looked at federal funding from NSF and NIH. OCR resolutions. We did a Freedom of Information Act request to get that data. That was just a yes/no. Have they had an OCR resolution related to web accessibility or online accessibility? And have they had a lawsuit related to digital or web accessibility? This is not widely available, but we had Dustin Bowker, a University of Washington law student, spent countless hours querying law library databases, collecting this information, and developed a very formal system for doing that. So the policy characteristics we were looking for, does the policy include effective dates and milestones? Does it name the issuing authority? You know, is this from the chancellor's office? Does it specify a standard? Does it identify responsible parties? Does it define the scope of covered technologies? Does it apply to third party and procurement? Does it provide a feedback mechanism, and does it include enforcement or penalties? Just a couple of example policies to show you what we're talking about. This is the Colorado State University policy. Ultimately, even though we had specific variables we were looking for, it really is, a formal policy when you see one. This has got, a policy number, it's got issued by, it's got, very solid structure to it. the purpose of this policy and application of this policy and exemptions from this policy. This is a formal web accessibility policy or electronic and information technology accessibility policy. The next example just shows you, this is a snippet from a policy that has an enforcement mechanism. It says, failure to comply with this policy may put the college at risk for penalty, including civil and/or criminal lawsuits. There could be disciplinary consequences for employees who do not adhere to this policy. So it doesn't specify what those are. Some of the enforcement mechanisms are very specific in prescribing kind of a process by which the policy is enforced. This one doesn't do that, but it's very threatening. And so, presumably, employees at this institution would take this seriously. The third policy, this is from Stanford University, and I just wanted to highlight responsibilities being, that was one of the variables we were looking for. This clearly has a yes for that variable. There's an entire responsibility section that identifies the dean, the department chair, the administrative department head, vice president, vice provost, or principal investigator lead as being the responsible parties, and then it goes on to define what that means. What are their responsibilities exactly? And presumably, if you've got somebody who owns this, then they're going to take it seriously. At least that was the hypothesis that we were testing. So the overall population is 3,386 U.S. higher education institutions. 2,653 of those have a match in the 2012 study, so 78.35%. There's a lot of change in 10 years in higher education, mergers and institutions that disappear and new ones that come along. And 1,197 institutions have a web or technology policy, accessibility policy. That's 35.4%, which is much more than what we saw in 2012. And we'll get to a comparison in a little bit. But that resulted in a lot more work than we were anticipating with this effort. Also, there have been 482 OCR resolutions related to web online accessibility since 2010, and that was up to 2022, so there have been more, since the study. And lawsuits, we actually were surprised that there were 204 lawsuits related to digital accessibility from 2010 to 2022. And those lawsuits, it's interesting, just the data about those, 70.1% were against doctorate or master's schools. They were filed in 17 different U.S. district courts, but 81.4% of them were filed in the Southern District of New York. 84.3% were filed by serial plaintiffs, which we defined as individuals who have filed 3 or more lawsuits. And 4 individuals in particular have filed 54, 43, 22, and 15 lawsuits, respectively. And 76% of those were filed by Gottlieb and Associates. So, and we did include all of that in the analysis to see, is it more effective if the person is not a serial plaintiff, or if Gottlieb is not, the attorney. And there wasn't significant, findings there related to those variables. But I'm giving away, we'll get into results here in a little bit. So the 4 research questions in the new study that we were specifically exploring: has the accessibility of post-secondary websites improved in 10 years? How have institutions' web or technology accessibility policies changed over 10 years? Has the number of institutions with accessibility links on their homepage changed in 10 years? And of all that, what variables are most strongly associated with institutions' automated accessibility scores? So Jared's going to talk a bit more about the web accessibility component.
Thank you. I'm Jared Smith from WebAIM. I was thrilled when Terrell reached out and said, hey, we're going to do a follow-up on this research, and expressed interest in using Wave to collect that data. So we used the Wave API to scan all of the pages that were in the sample, collected that data, and then analyzed it. We found that there were some discrepancies from those basic accessibility metrics that were first tested and current testing methodologies implemented in Wave. So we actually customized a few logical rules as part of that to better align, so we were testing the same thing across those 10 years. And then we generated for each of these sites an accessibility score. And those scores are aligned with the WebAIM Million. The WebAIM Million is an annual analysis that WebAIM does of the top 1 million homepages. And we collect a lot of data on accessibility across those million homepages just to get a sense of where the web is at, right? What are the types of issues? What trends are we seeing over time? This year's analysis will be published next week. We're really excited about the results and are heavy duty in data analysis right now, and looking forward to publishing that. But we felt that this was really important because it provides a bit of a measure of accessibility, right? You can really say from all of the data that we collected, how does this align to web pages more generally, as opposed to just a number of errors or other aspects of accessibility, which maybe isn't all that helpful, right, outside of some broader context. So that's why we use the WebAIM Million. The scores are based on an accessibility impact methodology that we've generated. I presented on this yesterday. Our methodology uses automated data, high-level manual testing on a sample of pages to generate a score. For this, we only did the automated testing component. We didn't test 3,000 whatever websites manually, but the automated testing we felt was really useful and important. The scores are based on the number of detected errors on those pages. That's given a 60% weighting in the overall score. Also error density, that's the number of errors by page elements. That's given a 30% weighting. That, we feel like that's informative because it gives a sense of the weighting, like how many errors are there per content on the page, to give a sense of the persistence of maybe the user to do that. 10 errors on a page with 30 elements is a lot of errors based on what you're getting, as opposed to 10 errors on a page with 1,000 elements on that page. And then 10% weighting was given to alerts, which are potential or likely accessibility issues. So these are things that can be detected with a high level of reliability. So we found, as we analyzed over 61,000 pages across those institutions, we detected on average 20 errors per page. And so you might think, well, 20 errors per page, what does that mean? Again, that's why we compared it to the WebAIM Million to get a better sense of these. The WebAIM Million average is 50, or at least it was in 2022. This year, next week's results will show that that's gone up a little bit, number of detected errors. So one thing that this indicates at a high level is that these higher ed institutions, their measurable accessibility is significantly better than web pages generally on the web, and I think that that's positive. Something that we'll be talking about this afternoon as well, and Terrell can maybe talk about our panel this afternoon.
Okay, so the results. What did we learn from all this? First of all, research question 1, has the accessibility of post-secondary websites improved in 10 years? This is not a live Q&A session, but it would be interesting to kind of get the sense of, prior to unveiling this, what do you all think? Are things better than they were then? At least on these 5 measures, we saw significant improvement. The presence of a document language in 2012, 37.1% of sites had that, and now it's almost universal. 98.9% of sites have a lang attribute. Headings, this is just checking whether a heading is present at all. Any heading tags, not whether they're in the proper order, not that sophisticated. But in 2012, 77.9% of pages had headings, and now that is almost universal, 98.3%. Page regions, as I mentioned, ARIA was a new thing back in 2012, but there were some early adopters. 2.9% of web pages did include ARIA landmark regions. Now that is almost universal. And this was one of the variables where we tweaked the rules a little bit. We allowed for HTML5 semantic tags because they weren't a thing back before in 2012. And so, it seems reasonable to include that because it's the same thing as using an ARIA landmark region. But we're up to 93.4%. Variables on which it's not universal, but still there was a big leap. Alt text improved from 61.5 to 87.1%, and form labels from 40.7 to 67.8%. So what seems to be happening there, and we'll talk more about this afternoon, kind of the implications of all this, but those items for which we can kind of expect there to be accessibility built into themes and templates, document language, headings, page regions, those are addressed because people are using themes and templates to build their websites. And so things where authors and individual designers and developers have to make a conscious choice to include accessibility, adding alt text, adding form labels, those are not quite as high, but we're still seeing significant improvement. Question 2, how have institutions' web or technology accessibility policies changed in 10 years? Well, in 2012, there were 274 policies. That's all we found across all institutions. Only 8.4% of institutions had any sort of policy, even just aspirational policy statements. The most common was formal standalone, so there were web accessibility policies out there. 35% of the policies that we found were that type. And institutions with policies tended to be public, it was 83.2% of the institutions, medium to very large, 77.8%, and 4-year degrees, 71.5%. So very different scenario in 2022. We now had 1,197 policies, up to then 35.4% of institutions. So there still are many that don't have, but far more that do have policies than did 10 years ago. The most common type is now a general statement. That's 53.2% of policies. And again, institutions with policies still tend to be public, medium to very large with 4-year degrees, but there is a substantial increase in policies at private not-for-profit institutions, 2-year schools, and small and very small schools. And that latter group, they do tend to have general statements as opposed to formal web accessibility policies, and that's why we see the spike in general statements. So just looking across Carnegie category, we can see the increases from in associates schools went from 21 policies in 2012 to 74 in 2022. Doctorate, big leap from 35 to 152. Masters, 36 to 79. Baccalaureate, there was only one policy among baccalaureate schools in 2012, that's up to 44. Special focus schools from 3 to 9, and tribal schools from 0 to 2. So every category, there have been more policies implemented. Overall, 96 in 2012. These are formal standalone policies only. 96 in 2012, up to 359 in 2022, or 10.6% of the overall sample. The accessibility links on homepage, 240 institutions had that in 2012. That was 7.4% of the population. And in 2022, that had jumped to 1,438, or 42.5%. So lots more institutions have an accessibility link. That tends to go to some sort of web accessibility related page. In some cases, it's accessibility more broadly, but often it has to do with web accessibility or digital accessibility. The final question then, what variables are most strongly associated with institutions' automated accessibility scores? We did an analysis variance and Pearson's correlation coefficient were used to test the relationship between characteristics of the institutions and web accessibility, while exploratory multiple regressions were used to develop a multivariate model of web accessibility. So I mentioned Liz Moore was the statistician on the project, and she really put a lot of energy into the best analysis and went back and forth with us on exploring that. She is the statistician, and so I can't really speak nearly as intelligently as her about those analyses and how they work. But in the end, what we end up with is a model that includes the best predictors of web accessibility in some kind of order of strength of the effect. And so the best predictors of web accessibility we found by doing that are the size of the institution, and these are in order from strongest to least strong, but they're all strong. Having resolved an OCR complaint related to web accessibility, having a web accessibility policy of any type. So it didn't matter whether it was a formal web accessibility policy or just a general statement or those other types. But if you've got some sort of policy, then web accessibility tended to be stronger than if you had none. Control of the institution, which is it a public or private institution, is it for-profit or not? Public institutions, that's a positive correlation. Private for-profit, that's a negative correlation. Having received an NIH or NSF award is part of this, and that seems to be correlated with size of institution. Typically, NIH, NSF schools are larger institutions, but the fact that both are in the model, the way that the statistical analysis works, suggests that these are two independent, they're having an independent effect on the model. Indication of a responsible party in the web accessibility policy. So of all those 8 characteristics that we looked at related to policies, that was the one that contributed to the model, having a responsible party. And so if you don't yet have a policy at your institution and you're working toward that, then I would strongly encourage you to think about responsible parties and how to incorporate that into your policy. The total degrees conferred, being the recipient of a lawsuit related to web accessibility, and interestingly, that was a less powerful predictor than having resolved an OCR complaint. There are big differences in those two variables. Being a tribal college it is negatively associated, and being a HBCU is also negatively associated. So that suggests, I think, that we have some work to do there to improve web accessibility at those particular types of institutions. So we've got 2 slides with a giant bar graph just because there's so many variables they didn't fit on one slide. And mainly the goal here is just to kind of present sort of big picture, which variables rise to the top or are lower when we're looking at average website accessibility score with an overall average of 6.95. The largest bar has OCR resolution with an N, again, of 464 institutions fall into that category. And policy with a responsible party is also a very high bar. So those 2 really stand out as being significant contributors. Also, the first several variables in this bar chart are the size of institutions. So you can see the comparison. Large or very large has a higher bar. Medium also has a high bar, but not as high. And then as we get into small and very small and exclusively grad or professional schools, the bar gets smaller and smaller. So that effect of being a large or very large institution, really sort of stands out. Also, policies, policy with a responsible party, high bar, policy without a responsible party, also a high bar, having some sort of policy, again, is a contributor, but if you have a responsible party, it's a significantly higher average accessibility score than if you don't have responsible parties identified. And then we see the effect of public institution being significantly higher than private for-profit, which is significantly higher than, or private not-for-profit, which is significantly higher than private for-profit. And then again, the difference between has OCR resolution, the highest of all, and lawsuit being just a little bit above average. And so probably just to guess, what's going on there, we know that OCR, as they're working on, resolutions, that's a partnership, and they're collaborating with the institution and really sort of helping them to grow and to improve. Whereas in a lawsuit situation, chances are that's not going to happen. It's more sort of a punitive approach that may not have, the desired results. Also, as we look at the second part of that bar chart, a couple variables that stand out on the high end are CUSU and CUMU, which, if I remember the acronyms, is Coalition for Urban Serving and Coalition of Urban and Metropolitan Universities. And so those are institutions with a mission of supporting their urban environment, their metropolitan environment, and maybe as an institution that cares, maybe accessibility is a higher priority for them. And I think we'll stop there and move on to just the limitations of the study. Although this is all very good information, I think, and it gives us kind of a direction of an indication of where things are headed. It does just look at the top 10 web pages, and that may be indicative of an institution's overall accessibility or may not. Probably it's an indication of how much the institution cares at a top level and a centralized level. So the central web team probably is responsible for a lot of those top 10 web pages. And that accessibility may or may not have made it out into the trenches. So future studies could utilize a larger sample of web pages to account for that. Also, it's an automated assessment of web accessibility, as Jared mentioned. Not practical to do manual assessment with this many pages, but maybe somehow manual testing could be incorporated, into a study like this. Are we really measuring accessibility, or what are we measuring exactly? I do feel like looking at the top 10 web pages does tell us something about the commitment of the institution. Also, we did not control for the effect of time on the predictive effect of policies, OCR resolutions, and lawsuits. So, it does take time for these things to have an effect. If you got an OCR case or you got a lawsuit, you're not going to be accessible overnight. And it could also be that the lawsuit is the result of inaccessibility. And so, which comes first? Not something that we controlled for, and that would actually be maybe an interesting separate study to really dig a little deeper into what is the effect of an OCR resolution or of a lawsuit. So as Jared mentioned, we are going to be sort of building on this. This is kind of the foundation that we start with. We've got some data, and we've got other data sources too, like the WebAIM Million. And we're going to be here in this room for a fireside chat this afternoon at 2:20. And that'll be Jared and I plus Rob Carr from WebAIM. Kind of, just thinking and talking about what does this mean for the future of web accessibility? What's our vision for sort of where we're headed, and what are the implications of all this? Can we stare into our crystal ball and come up with some ideas of what we might expect in the next 10 years? Probably not, but we're going to talk about it. So if you'd like to join us for that, come back at 2:20. So this, I understand, is not a live Q&A session. So this is the last slide, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. And hopefully you can join us this afternoon as well. I'm happy to talk with people who are live here in the audience, afterwards. Thank you.
All right, that was informational to say the least, wasn't it? It's probably giving several of us that are in the post-secondary areas right now some pause for thought about where we stand and what we're doing. So I encourage everyone that is here to come to this afternoon's session. It's a fireside chat, so it'll be a little bit more informal, more discussion, more data points that we'll be able to work with together. So thanks to Terrell and Jared and all of their colleagues. One more clap, please.